1997's Goldeneye 007 for the Nintendo 64 is a game that had no business being good. Originally developed by Rare and published by Nintendo, it was a licensed tie-in game in a time when most licensed tie-in games were best thrown in the trash, and released 2 years after the movie it was based on left theaters. And yet, Goldeneye 007 became one of the defining games of the 1990s, absorbing gamers into its difficult, skill-intensive gameplay and addicting split-screen multiplayer. Even today, there's no better way to perk up a room full of gamers, old and young, than saying, "Hey, I have an N64 with Goldeneye. Who wants to play?" But that's the thing. Since its 1997 release, Goldeneye has not received any sort of re-release, for a variety of reasons, stemming from company buyouts to intellectual property gobbledygook. And thus, for the last 26 years, the only way to enjoy Goldeneye was on original N64 hardware or through emulation. Until now. Goldeneye 007 has finally been re-released on Nintendo Switch as well as the Xbox Series consoles. At last, we no longer have to deal with outdated AV cables, dusty cartridges, and wobbly joysticks. But how did these new versions turn out? Today I will be answering that question, lending my thoughts on how they hold up on these modern machines and what the differences are between them. So let's gloss over our objectives, shake up some martinis, and begin. Right off the bat, let's touch on the basics and how to play these new versions. Goldeneye on Switch is available through the system's N64 emulator, which is granted to players subscribed to the Switch Online Expansion Pack tier, the $50 a year one. The Xbox version is available through Game Pass. However, if you are not subscribed to Game Pass, you can play this version through purchasing a digital copy of Rare Replay. And those who already own a digital copy of Rare Replay will get the game for free. Yes, both these versions run by emulation. The Switch version is the original N64 ROM with some improvements to the visuals and online multiplayer, made possible by the online functionality of the Switch N64 emulator. The Xbox version unfortunately does not support online multiplayer, but it has received some modern enhancements as well as support for achievements. Before diving into the nitty-gritty of the graphics, here's some footage of the original Goldeneye. Now, this is running with emulation on my PC, so I can't say this is 100% accurate, but I think we can all agree this is pretty indicative of what it's been like to play Goldeneye in the decades since release. And looking at the Switch and Xbox versions, the improvement is immediately clear. Both feature upscaled resolutions. The Switch presents the game at 1080p docked, 720p in handheld, and the far more capable Xbox Series consoles can render the game up to 4K. The Xbox version right out of the gate sports 16:9 widescreen, which looks fantastic for Goldeneye. Looks fantastic for everything, obviously, but there's something about a cinematic format that just lets this game sing. The Switch version defaults to 4:3, but if you take a trip into the options menu and set the aspect ratio to 16:9, voila, glorious widescreen. And no, this isn't widescreen within a 4:3 frame like in the original. It's a full 16:9 image. Beyond both versions rendering at vastly higher resolutions, they feature no further graphical enhancements. These are the same blocky, smudgy graphics we all enjoyed back in '97. They look great on a CRT back then, but today on a modern flat screen, woof. Although there's definitely still some nostalgic charm to enjoy here, and I would say the explosions and smooth performance capture for the enemies still hold up nicely. I would love to say that outside of resolutions, both these versions are on par visually, but that's just not the case. The Switch version is not the cleanest image. Jaggies are everywhere and very apparent while playing docked. The Xbox version is far cleaner with crisp, sharp edges. The Switch version is also darker than the Xbox version. Shadows are a lot deeper and contrasty. You can distinctly see this with the ending cutscene of the runway level, with the bottom of the plane completely cast in shadow. In general, I think the Xbox version got some color correction. It seems brighter all around, and the contrast is toned down quite a bit. And I don't hate it. I think it pops a lot more compared to the Switch version. The Switch version also introduces some texture tiling not present in the original or Xbox versions. You can see it clearly in this shot of the dam level and when the camera flips around Mr. Blockington's steel. And I don't care if that joke was stupid. I liked it. What's odd is that this only appears in certain textures. Notice that the surrounding textures are untouched. It appears this happened because the textures were scaled down. And while they do appear sharper compared to the other versions, the introduced tiling is a blemish. Oh, but there's some funkiness in the Xbox version too. For whatever reason, the geometry of this version has a wobble to it, not unlike the wobble seen in an old PlayStation 1 game. It's very apparent on the snow-covered surface level where the ground geometry is tearing up at the seams. There's also an abundance of glitching, flickering textures that were seemingly not present in the original version. It's not great, and it makes the game feel shoddy, at least to me. According to the developer of the Xbox version, CodeMystics, these are issues that have always been there. They just weren't easily seen in standard definition, but are more obvious in high definition. Yeah, perhaps, but there have been fan upscaling projects that have seemed to resolve these problems, so it does appear to be fixable if it is an issue. Also, if this is something that's always been there and we're just seeing it because the game is in HD resolutions, why am I not seeing any of this on the Switch version? Perhaps there's something in the Switch emulator that prevents this. I don't know. Another odd thing is that the audio quality for the Xbox version is off. There's a staticky rattle to it now, which can be pretty distracting to somebody who knows this game well. Here, take a listen. It's another issue that makes this version feel shoddy, and it is disappointing. Also, you can take this as a nitpick, but it's a real bummer the text wasn't updated for higher resolutions. Both versions use the original standard definition text, and it looks pretty bad in HD. I suppose this is somewhat excusable for the Switch version as it's just the original ROM, but it sucks that there wasn't any effort to update this for the Xbox version. I mean, they were able to put in the Xbox controller graphic for the options menu. We couldn't have gotten a graphic designer to do a pass on the font. There's been much talk already about the control differences between these versions. The Switch version is the original N64 control scheme applied to the Switch Joy-Cons and Pro Controller, and it is awkward. By default, the left stick handles moving and looking, and the right stick is your C buttons, handling left and right strafing and looking up and down. The front triggers, L and R, both activate aim mode, and ZL, left trigger, is to shoot, not the right trigger. It is far from ideal and it takes some getting used to. However, there is a workaround. You can actually go into the Switch system and change the controller button mapping, like swapping the left and right triggers so you can shoot with the right one. I'm sure if you spent enough time, you could get this control scheme in more comfortable shape, and you can save presets here too, which is nice. The Xbox version thankfully features a modern FPS control scheme. Left stick to move, right stick to aim, right trigger to shoot, with the bumpers able to cycle through weapons. It feels great and makes Goldeneye so much more playable. Oh no, we're not done. Performance was also a letdown. Both these versions shoot for 30 frames per second. Why not 60? Well, according to the dev, this was a limitation of the original GoldenEye ROM, which was designed for 30 FPS. Although there have been fan efforts that have broken this cap. But in all fairness, 30 FPS is a huge improvement over the original version, which often dipped well below 30. And in all honesty, I'd be happy with 30 FPS if it was locked. But it's not. Both versions suffer from consistent frame dips and hitches. However, the frame dips feel more severe on the Xbox version, making for a sluggish gameplay experience all around. The Switch version was actually the more consistent performer, and despite the wonky controls, was a smoother play all around. Look, I don't care what issues and limitations cropped up from emulating these games. It is absolutely baffling to me that a 26-year-old Nintendo 64 game would have any performance issues on these systems, especially the Xbox Series X. And of all the issues I've expressed so far, this was the one that irritated me the most. Fortunately, the multiplayer still slaps. Yeah, despite all my belly aching, there is still nothing like getting your friends together for some rockets and slappers or golden gun madness. And what is the shining highlight of this re-release is that we can now do this easily, and not deal with the hassle of getting that N64 hooked up to the flat screen and playing on controllers whose best days are far behind them. And while the graphical and performance issues I talked about still crop up here, they aren't nearly as severe compared to the single-player campaign and to the N64 original. The big downside is that only the Switch features online play. Then again, the Xbox version has that modern control scheme, which makes this version a lot less awkward to play and easier for players to jump in and get going. And when you're tipsy with your friends on a Saturday night and you just want to get some split screen in, the path of least resistance is the best path. Something I want to make clear is that my critiques of the Xbox version are not meant to paint its developer, Code Mystics, as lazy. Honestly, I think they were hired onto a project with very narrow scope. Not a lot of time, not a big budget. I don't think they were contracted to do an extensive remaster. I think they were asked to get the game running at 4K as smooth as possible and get it shipped fast. And they did what they could to get the job done. And their responses to player feedback on Twitter reflect this, claiming that reverse engineering the ROM code to improve it, or outright porting the game, would have been too time-consuming and challenging. And I do accept that for the most part. I mean, I'll be honest, I can't help but raise an eyebrow when I see other fan upscaling projects that have done it better, but then again, there's a big difference in people doing something out of love and passion and people that need to get the bills paid and move on to the next job. But what does annoy me is why wasn't this a project scoped to be a thorough, definitive remaster? A true modernizing of the game and not a quick and dirty emulation job. I mean, this is Goldeneye. Goldeneye, one of the most important games of all time and a symbol of millions of childhoods. Why wasn't this given the time and money it deserves? Was it a contractual limitation with the other Goldeneye rights holders? More on that in a bit. Because if not, it's kinda hard for me not to look at this as a cheap means to drive Game Pass and Switch Online subscriptions. I know that sounds pessimistic, but can you blame me? And really what drives most of my annoyance and disappointment here is that we very nearly got an ideal GoldenEye remaster that you can actually play right now. This is the cancelled GoldenEye 007 remaster for Xbox 360. A lot of you watching are likely well aware of this, but for those sitting there going, wait, what? Let me briefly explain. Rare began development on this version back in 2006, with the intention of releasing it on Xbox Live Arcade, very much like the Perfect Dark remaster that would drop in 2010. It would keep the gameplay the same, add some quality of life improvements, completely revamp the graphics, and include both split screen and online multiplayer. This version was pretty much complete before its cancellation. Reportedly, it only had 2 months of development left. So what happened? Licensing. For this remaster to be released, Microsoft would have to get MGM and EON Productions on board, the holders of the James Bond film license, as well as Nintendo, who was the publisher of GoldenEye 007 for N64 specifically, and still held some rights to it following Microsoft's buyout of Rare from Nintendo back in 2002. Now, if this isn't quite making sense, or if you want to learn more, I've linked some articles in the description that will shed some more light. After Microsoft suggested GoldenEye be remastered for 360, Rare went full steam ahead on development, believing the licensing kerfluffle would be worked out. Unfortunately, MGM, Nintendo, and Microsoft could not reach an agreement, and despite the game being right at the finish line, it was shelved. Years later, in 2021, a full playthrough of the remaster would find its way onto the internet, revealing its existence to the masses. And then shortly after that, the full ROM was leaked onto the internet, which is how I'm playing it here on the Xenia Xbox 360 emulator. And oh yes, we're gonna talk about it. First thing I gotta say is, yep, this is basically done. The entire single-player campaign is playable, as well as the multiplayer. And yes, you can connect multiple Xbox controllers to Xenia and play split-screen. There are some bugs and minor missing assets, but it's nothing that really hurts the experience, and there have been community patches made to correct these. Like the current Xbox version, the remaster has an updated, modern control scheme with the player able to equip special tools, like the covert modem, with a button press instead of going into the menu. Dang it. The graphics have been fully overhauled, similar to the graphical update in the 2010 Perfect Dark remaster. Although, unlike that remaster, this one lets you swap between the remastered and original visuals, a feature I will always find cool. And finally, the game runs at a locked, silky smooth 60 frames per second. This version is phenomenal. It updates Goldeneye in such a way that it's faithful to the original experience, but feels far more modern and polished. Basically, it's an old house with a fresh coat of paint, and some updates to the wiring. Textures are high resolution and vastly more detailed. The dam now truly feels like you're deep in the mountains, with bright snow covering the dark mountain rock. And there's new elements added to the environments to flesh them out further, like this tree line above the mountains here on the dam, as well as the perimeter fence on surface, replacing the original tree line. Some levels feel totally transformed, like Statue, a level that has aged terribly over the years in terms of visuals. Now it really looks like a graveyard of the Soviet era, and it's so cool. Enemy model geometry is improved. They're more rounded and realistic, but keep the original motion capture. And your gun models look just as good. Hey, the AK-47 doesn't look like a pencil anymore. Swapping between original and remastered graphics is a treat that never gets old. Unfortunately, the original graphics are a bit buggy, with some bits of geometry missing. I do have some nitpicks. While most levels have changed for the best, some might have lost something in the improvement. Looking at surface again, in the N64 original, the distance fog helped give this level an almost mysterious, tense feel as you wandered this seemingly endless snowfield. But with the remaster able to have a greater draw distance, you can see the full scope of the level and realize it's not that big to begin with. And it kinda takes some of the atmosphere away. Also, is it just me, or does the tank on runway look worse? Nitpicks aside, if this remaster was released, it would have been a gold standard in how to remaster a video game. The work Rare put into this is above and beyond. In my opinion, this is the best way to play Goldeneye today, without a doubt. The downside though is that you have to play it on PC through emulation and track down the ROM, which for many is just another Tuesday. But for others, that might be a hurdle for a variety of reasons. But hey, it's out there, and you can play it right now. And believe me, it's not hard to find it. There you have it. Both these versions are disappointing in their own ways and far from a definitive version of Goldeneye. If I had a Walther PPK to my head and was forced to choose between them, I suppose I would go with the Xbox version, but just barely. I have plenty of irritations with it, but that control scheme just makes it more comfortable to play and easier to jump into, especially in regards to multiplayer. And let's be real, that's the mode that's gonna get played the most. Now, all criticisms aside, do these versions of Goldeneye work? Yes. Is Goldeneye still fun to play? Double yes. Is the multiplayer still magnificent? Triple yes. If you haven't played Goldeneye in years and are jonesing for it, this will do the trick. But what bums me out is that in a time when so many significant classic games are getting excellent archival quality remasters and full-on remakes, it's a shame that something with this much cultural significance has not received the same sort of treatment. Okay, I guess it was remade on Wii, but that's a different story. I doubt much will be done with the Switch version, but my hope is that the Xbox release will get some patches to fix the problems and polish it up further. My true hope, though, is that the cancelled remaster will get an official release. It's hard to say if that will happen. Probably not. But I think it's something gamers should keep asking for. You never know. There are plenty of examples in gaming of the squeaky wheel getting the grease. If you have the means to play that version, that's what I recommend. There's also the 1964 GEPD project, which I've shown a few times throughout the video. A fan project that also remasters the game through emulation. I'll put a link below for it. I also want to shout out Goldeneye Source as well, a free, full remake of the multiplayer in the Source engine, a good alternative that's been around for years. Links below for that as well. Otherwise, that's it for me. What are your thoughts on Goldeneye? What are your thoughts on these latest versions? Please be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you dug the video, please be sure to subscribe, like, share, and smack that bell. If you want to come say hi, my Discord is linked below, along with my affiliate links. I'm Kirk, and thank you for watching this video. Stay safe out there.